be kept awake at night by remembering the spinning lady and the blue dress, or was it a cream dress that we shared with you? So those were some examples of how we see things differently, basically.
And then we had a fabulous session with Rashid Iqbal, and again, you know, hearing from his experiences, with his candor, with his humor, with his wisdom. That was certainly a highlight for many of us in the room on that day. And then we moved on to...
Yeah, we started to utilize that Robert Dilts model, that pyramid, to look at not just the idea of the individual as a system, but how an organization, and also it can apply to a team, of course, how the organization can fit that particular model with a particular around having a purpose and a mission, and then obviously an identity and values. And we looked at creating a vision for another larger system, and then aligning and identifying your particular purpose or mission statement, which is your contribution to bringing that vision around. And then finally, we talked about the idea of, if you want to move the organization forward and develop it, a way of doing that is to identify the various elements in this pyramid, how you would like them to be in the future, identifying how they are now, and then doing a gap analysis between the two, and using that that idea. That's a way of helping you identify what needs to go into your strategic plans.
Excellent. And then the final session, we were looking at decision making and how so much of us is involved in decision making. Some of us we're consciously aware of, and much of which we're not. We considered the system 1, system 2, the unconscious processing that's going on, that's swift, instinctive, easy, lazy possibly way of thinking, but it is very vital and very useful, and it gives us a gut reaction and our instincts, and they furnish us with very, very powerful, useful information. And the system 2 that engages and is a bit slower and more analytical and uses data and analysis and attempts to be objective. But then we explored a little bit about the biases that still come into play, because our whole system is involved with the way we filter, the patterns we run, the individual map of the world that we have. So there's this interplay, and with the suggestion that in decision making, when it's a critical one, just to keep that heightened awareness of all those filters we're using, the perspective we're taking, and how it has limitations to it, and where it's a critical decision, what we can do to extend outside that, to bring in new information, to look at it more critically, to apply the critical thinking to critical decision making. I think that topped our day,
so that was
really.
a quick tour around, just a reminder of everything that we've done, and also there's been a lot of material online, some of which is being supportive of those key ideas, and there's been some additional things as well. So we're going to get you to work. Is it groups of 3, Rita?
There's 14 of us. Do you think we'll just do it in pairs?
Yeah, do it in pairs. That would be good. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So here we go. I think
so
Kevin.
Again, just reminding you, with your partner, we'd just like you to share, you know, what's the one thing that's really floated your boat, and maybe it's the thing that you've already begun to put into practice and had some results from. So yeah, is it 10 minutes, Rita?
10 minutes we're expecting you to have. And I will carry on. I'll put a notice up to let you know to come back. 10 minutes, 10 minutes. short discussion. What was the key learning? And Fiona and Catherine, are they still here? Yes, okay. And I'll pause and remind me, Kevin, please. Press record, but don't forget. Everyone's coming back. Very good, very good. We're all smiling, yes. Excellent. And that's the full complement. Excellent. Was it nice to just have that quick opportunity to say hi? And yes, good. What the other aspect that we wanted to do in relation to that review, as I mentioned up top, was just to invite you to capture in the chat, and then I'll transfer it so everyone can read it on the in the module that we'll follow up with. Like it says here, you know, really we're looking forward to you utilizing all that you've learned. And if you take yourself ahead just a year, that seems like a good time given where we are in the year. So as I look forward to this time next year, what will I be doing differently in leading myself, my team, and my organization? So a little bit of intent setting here as well. So when you look, take yourself, however you do that in your mind's eye, take yourself forward a year and notice what you've been doing that's making a difference to your leadership, that's making a difference for you and your team and your organization. And if you could just capture one sentence, I know there'll be many, many things, but just one thing, if you can just capture it in chat.
Are we recording, Rita?
I am.
Good, excellent.
We should have some lovely music playing now. Should have some Brahms or something. Lovely, Debbie. Are people thinking hard, or are you saving it personally? I'm hoping we'll get to see them as you press enter.
I've got one from Debbie, creating a vision with purpose and communicating it with credibility, which is fabulous.
A vision for Beth. Oh, no, I jumped. They're all coming in together, of course. They're all about the same length sentences. So allow everyone a few moments just to glance through them. As I say, I will capture them. Oh.
We always find it interesting how people feed back to us that this program's come at exactly the right moment. You know, whether it's because you're developing your vision or whether you've got some critical meetings coming up or, you know, whatever it might be. Consistently surprises us at how many people say that, you know, gosh, this has just come along at exactly the right time for me. So.
And they're all very powerful sentiments, and just reading Catherine's at the end there, Catherine, being more curious and accepting about people's varying maps of the world. And it'll be interesting to notice what difference that makes, because it will make an awful lot of difference. And of course, we learn more about our own map in being curious like that too. Excellent. Is there anyone who's got a burning one they want to share with us? A burning thing from their learning?
Who's had a real win-win in the last couple of weeks?
well, everyone's looking comfortable and smiley, but nothing that you desperately need to share with the rest of the group. Okay.
I'm happy to share. So I found it really, really useful the last session to talk about the real difference between vision and mission, but then also the connection that there needed to be between values that really meant something and behaviours. And it really made me realise that our values are quite weak, and motherhood and apple pie. And interestingly and very usefully, our session came the day before our organisation ran a big leadership summit, and there were value sessions there, and our chief executive was there, which kind of solidified it and helped me to think that through a bit more. And I've just come out of my one-to-one with our chief executive to talk, and I've raised it there. So I've taken the massive action to raise that our values weren't working and what I thought we should do about it. And he was really positive about it, and we were talking about the next staff conference being based on trying to redo our values and link them properly to behaviour. So yeah, I'm feeling very win-win right now.
Brilliant, Fiona. Thank you for sharing that. Excellent. Exactly what we love to hear. and again, of course, as all your colleagues here, you know, the people are at different stages, and knowing that Fiona's doing that, there might be someone who thinks, oh, I'll pick up the phone and see how she's tackling it, or someone who can give her extra advice on how to do it, perhaps. Hopefully that network's working well. So thank you for that. We are doing whistle stop, but as we said, and as we were discussing with you, and as we're picking up things on your online correspondence with us, we really thought there was some power in giving you the additional information. And we sort of touched on this, gave you an option, you remember, on the last program, about whether we did the decision making or talked about motivation, because as a leader, of course, an inspiring leader who's taking people with you, understanding about motivation patterns is so critical. So what we are going to share with you now are some key the different filters. You know, we were talking about the map of the world and everyone's different. Some of the biases, some of the default patterns that people are running, so those filters, we talked about the values and beliefs, and it sounds, even from those messages you've got here, you're starting to notice all those. We've got the sensory preferences. We touched on the fact that some people are much more visual, some are auditory, some are kinesthetic. Language itself is a filter, and there's so much more we could share about that. But the other filters are these meta programs. So we're going to there is a series of them, and we're today going to touch on 2 or 3 of them, depending on how times goes, that are very strong, powerful motivator patterns that people have, that are driving their decision making, driving their desire to do things. And you'll find incredibly and more fascinating, again, in terms of your self-awareness. You'll be identifying your own preferences, your own default pattern, and you'll realize that there are other ways of doing it, and some people you deal with do it a different way, and that's why, again, sometimes that communication doesn't work as well as it might. So I'm handing over to Kevin.
And what can often happen is that we because it's our default pattern, we tend to use that one, and we lead and we manage in that way, and that doesn't work well for everyone. So having an awareness of what the opposites to these patterns are is useful, because they may be prevalent in some of the people that you're actually leading. Okay, so so filters. the rose tinted spectacles is a good metaphor for this idea of meta programs. So I have a question for you, and I have a little prop here which I need to be very careful with. But what do I have here? Hopefully you can all see that. Just somebody shout out what you can see. What does it remind you of? Anything?
A glass half full.
A glass half full. Was that Catherine?
That was me.
Sonia.
I said
Sonia.
half a glass
Hi,
of water.
Sonia.
And
okay.
Catherine said glass half full as well.
I said half a glass of water.
Oh, half
Similar.
a glass of water.
Similar.
I just love the way you're all convinced that it's just water. But there you go.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so it's half a glass of water. Glass half full, half empty is probably the metaphor that comes to mind for most of us. And what's interesting about that particular metaphor is that we're making two levels of observation. The first one is the specific. So if we are labeling somebody as a glass half full person, what kind of things are we saying about them?
Optimistic.
Positive thinking.
Optimistic, positive thinking. Yeah, anything else?
Asset-based.
Sorry, Kadra, was that?
Asset-based.
Asset-based, did you say? Okay, all right.
Like
Yeah,
what I've got.
yeah.
Focusing on
Ooh,
what
I
I've
like.
got, what assets I have.
Write
or
that
what-
one down, Rita. I like that
Yeah,
one.
asset based.
And what about if we label somebody as a glass half empty person? What are we indicating that we're observing?
Pessimistic, negative, prudent.
Yeah. Okay.
Deficit based, which is the opposite of the asset based.
Excellent.
What was the opposite to asset? Sorry.
Deficit.
Deficit
Deficit
Bit
based.
more
based.
as opposed to asset strength based.
Yeah. Okay.
Gosh, we will use those terms again. We like those two. Okay, so we're making a specific observation, but we're also making a general observation that people's behavior falls into patterns. So, if we are labeling somebody as a glass half full person, we're making an observation that their behavior is positive, optimistic, as we've said, but also we are noting the fact that their behavior is coming in patterns, and a lot of behavior does appear in this way. We have our default ways of being, and some of these are what we call meta programs. So in the same way that somebody could be glass half full and somebody else could be glass half empty, and there is kind of a spectrum in between the two, so that somebody might be a little bit of both if they were bang in the middle. So what I want you to do is to keep that idea in mind, that behavior often comes in these spectrums, that there's an extreme at one side and there's an extreme at the other side. And whatever the pattern is, and we're going to introduce 2 or 3 to you today, you may think that you're at one end of the spectrum or at the far end, or you might be somewhere in the middle. So just keep that idea in mind, and then we'll introduce you to the specific patterns. Is everybody okay with that basic concept? Yeah. All right, excellent. So we're going to look at our first one now, and we have a little quote before that. This comes from Khalil Gibran. The optimist sees the rose and not its thorns. The pessimist stares at the thorns, oblivious of the rose. And that's an indication of the way in which these meta programs also operate as filters. So we have a little activity for you, first of all. We'll come back to that. What we want you to do is just jot down in the next minute some observations about what you're seeing on the screen.
On the shared screen.
on the shared screen, yeah. So just write down your observations about what you're seeing, and then we'll come back and review in a minute. Okay. Notice that none of them was spinning or different colours, or maybe they were.
Oh,
Who
maybe they
knows?
were.
Okay, so just shout out. We'll take some observations. Just shout out what you saw there, and we'll capture them.
68p.
68p. Okay.
Where was the 20p?
No, there was a 50, a 10.
Yeah, there was no 20p. I don't know why.
Okay, that's
Oh, that's
really,
what you noticed, Gareth. Where was the 20p? Okay.
that's really interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Thought the
Anybody else?
largest value coins were on top.
Okay. Yeah.
The
Go on,
three
Dave.
coins were face up.
Debbie.
And yeah, and I noticed that it looked like an old penny to me.
It looked what? Sorry.
It looked like an old penny, an old-fashioned one, because of the size of it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And was it Dave was saying something as well?
Yeah, just related to that one. I wasn't sure if the 50p was an old or new one. I wasn't quite sure. But the other one said was they're three face up, and the others were sort of tails.
Yeah.
Face up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, isn't it interesting that again with something very straightforward? Let me just put that up for a moment again. As far as I know, incidentally, they are all decimal coinage, as it were. But isn't it interesting that you've all noticed different things about a set of objects? And the reason that you've noticed different things about the set of objects is because of the filters that we're operating. And the filters are operating unconsciously. In other words, we're not aware of them. Now, what's interesting about this particular pattern, we talked about there's something at one side and there's something at another side. Well, this is a pattern that we're introducing you to now called sameness and difference. So at one side of the spectrum, we have sameness, and at the other end of the spectrum, we have difference. And incidentally, it doesn't matter which way around I'm demonstrating this. So for those people who are running a difference filter, what they will notice is what's different about the objects in the picture. For those people who are running a sameness filter, a sameness pattern, they will notice the patterns. So, if you have a look at what you've written down there, it might fall obviously, and if you've written 2 or 3 things down, they might fall obviously into either you've picked up a pattern about the group, or you've noticed what's really different. And it was interesting, Gareth's one there. Gareth, I think you noticed what coin was missing, which I don't think we've ever had before. But, that's a real clear indication of a difference pattern. Can you see that? Can you hear that as being somebody who's not noticing the patterns in the group? But in that instance, there's something missing. There's something not there. So that's clearly a difference sorter. And you may have a mixture. If you've written 4 or 5 things down, you may have a little some examples of sameness, some examples of difference. Maybe you're operating across that pattern. So in terms of this first pattern, sameness and difference, let's just have a look at some other aspects of that. A good question, incidentally, if you want to find out what pattern somebody else is running, is this one at the bottom. Notice how it's a very, what we call a clean question, what's the relationship between, it could be your work last year and this year. So, and by a clean question, there is no reference to either sameness or difference in the question. You know, some people would say, what's different about your job this year compared to last, or in what way is it the same? But we're going for a neutral question there. And depending on how the person chooses to answer the question, whether they focus on what's the same or what's different, may give you an indication of which particular pattern that they're running. Now, the implication of this particular pattern, hopefully you're getting some idea about what your default pattern might be, but the implication for you as a leader is you will have a mixed group of people in terms of all of these patterns, incidentally, but you will have people who are running a sameness pattern, and you will have people who are running a difference pattern. Now, the people who are running the sameness pattern, no prizes for guessing what kind of thing they would like. They like things to stay the same. And when you are coming in as a new leader, quite often, of course, what new leaders do is they want to introduce new ways of doing things. That, you know, they want to introduce a new strategy or whatever it might be, reorganize the way people are working together. That can be very, very unsettling for people that are running this particular sameness pattern.
And the difference pattern is the looking forward to change, innovation, actually getting bored if things aren't changing. So if you are bringing in new strategy, they might be the people who are more easily going to follow you because they're excited by that. Whereas the sameness people are a bit scared by that. The difference people are looking for that. And in fact, if your strategy is to consolidate and keep things the same for a long time, that these people who are different sorter are eager to move on and do different things. Mm-hmm. They're looking for people to come in with different ideas and different views. When you set them a challenge, a task to do, they'll look for different ways to do it. It's exciting. They'll look for a different way to do it. They'll look for what they can do different to how the pattern was before, as opposed to wanting to do the same thing. They may change jobs more often. They may look for role promotions or sideward shifts or different projects to manage, whereas the sameness person may be much more content in their same role and continuing that. And what you can do to motivate people is the language is a very powerful tool for this. So for the sameness person who's looking to hear what's the same, staying the same, when you're talking about proposing how you're moving forward, to actually bring out in the conversation, what is it that's the same? What we're doing an adjustment to. We're just amending. They're the sort of words. We're going to continue doing all the great stuff we're doing. Make sure that those are in your conversations. For the difference person, you're going to be talking about what's new and will appear exciting to them and use that language. In a mixed group, you're going to want to do both. You want to reassure the people that there's so much. And if you meant often sometimes what happens is people forget that people have invested so much into where they're at the moment, that current state. People have worked in it. Sometimes you get leaders coming in and doing that change, and it can be quite a slap in the face for people in terms of their loyalty and investment. So ensuring that you do acknowledge all the fantastic stuff that's been done already, and that much of what we have done is the foundations that we're going to build on, not that we're changing radically, that we're going to build on. It's what's allowing us to move on, can be helpful depending on the circumstances and the strategy, of course. For the different sorter, they're going to be very happy when you're introducing something different. So can you see how in a conversation, in your proposition, in your proposal, in your strategic planning, in the communications you're sharing, it may be useful to consider, how am I going to ensure that those people who have running this pattern, that they're more comfortable and scared by change, comfortable with sameness? How am I going to allow them space to be comfortable with what we're saying? And how am I going to also create that excitement? It's obviously one of those balancing, another one of those balancing acts that a leader does. Does that make sense? Can you see the difference? I mean, just in job change, in other life, I mean, the thing about meta programs, you may run different ones in different contexts, but if you're extremely extremely different or extremely sameness, it's likely that it's going to impact many aspects of your life. Whereas when you're in the middle, you might find, well, at home I tend to be really this, and at work I tend to be that. Or when it comes to holidays, I like to do new and exciting things, but when it comes to something else. So there is a context relation to it. But if you have someone who's very strongly at one end or the other of that spectrum, you may find it permeates across much of their life. And you'll know this from personal life as much as from work life.
Just another take on this, just to add in, is another label for this particular pattern is match and mismatch. So what you will tend to find in somebody who is running a sameness pattern is that they will generally, not always, be in agreement in a group situation. So, you know, if we were organizing a social night out and, you know, we were saying, where do we want to go? Should we all go for a Chinese or something? That, you know, generally speaking, the people running the sameness, the match pattern, would be in agreement with the rest of the group. Whereas people running the mismatch pattern, the mismatchers, and you know who you are, they would be the ones who would be saying, no, I don't want to do that. They would generally, and these are generalizations, remember, they would generally look to go against what the group was proposing. So that's kind of at the extremes, this idea of match and mismatch. And I used to have a very close friend, no longer with us now, who was an extreme mismatcher. And for a period of time, whatever I was recommending to this person, they would always poo-poo it. You know, it didn't matter what it was, they would always kind of be running the yes, but kind of thing. That's another example of this this difference pattern. So one way around this that might work is I used to say to him, you're probably not going to like this, and then blah, blah, blah. Now, the first thing he hears, of course, is you're probably not going to like this. So he's going to mismatch that unconsciously and think, you know, who are you to tell me what I'm not going to like? I might like this. So that kind of reverse psychology idea might be a useful tool that you could try out as well. Not always going to work.
It's not always going to work. But also, I mean, we're talking about extremes and everything. Of course, just in case we missed the point, all of these are really, really useful skills to have. You know, someone who, you know, for a proofreader, for, you know, there's a lot of benefits and usefulness across the whole spectrum in what's going on here. It's very useful for people to be able to spot patterns, and there may be particular roles where that's incredibly useful, and you know, it's all okay. More than okay.
I want our accountant to be a bit of a mismatcher, you know, to point out to us if we're doing anything wrong, to notice anything that's not quite right. So that's useful.
Yeah, the 20p that's missing, I think, Gareth.
All right, okay. Let's look at the second one. And okay, the second one, I have a question for you, and just two or three of you can answer this question in turn. and write your own answer down as well. How do you know that you're doing a good job? Who have we not heard from today? Sorrel, tell us, how do you know when you're doing a good job?
I'm being slightly quiet because I've got a bad cough, so you'll have to excuse me if I'm a bit croaky.
Oh dear, sorry.
I think for me it's very easy to jump into that productivity mindset. So I'm always about getting things done and cracking through things. But I feel like that's not actually the real answer, because you could be doing a lot of things and not the right thing.
Yeah. Okay. So how would you know that you're doing the right thing? What tells you that you're doing the right thing?
I think it comes back to that alignment with your kind of core mission and purpose and values.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
What
Yeah.
the impact is.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Beth, what about you? How do you know that you're doing a good job?
Andrew and I talked a little bit about this in that little breakout we did. I think it depends on the job, but we were talking about it in the context of being in a meeting or delivering a presentation or something, and you just know when you leave, when you think you've done a good job, you feel really positive and you think, yeah, that went well. And that has to be based on the feedback that you're getting from the people that you're with. And likewise, you kind of know when you haven't done your best job as well, or I do anyway. I just kind of leave thinking that didn't land, I didn't deliver that, or I know I wasn't at my best. And so I think there's some internal measure of whether you know you're giving your best and being your best, and then there's the external measure of the feedback that you're getting from other people on whatever it is that you're delivering, whether it's a physical piece of work or information.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Let's take one more. Sonia, what about you? How do you know when you're doing a good job?
I don't always, is my honest answer to that. And I'm going to relate this to the role that I'm in currently. So how do I know I'm doing a good job currently? By not being told I'm not doing a good job. is how I would is how I would measure that. But I do feel that I had a team meeting last week, and I used the ultimate success formula as part of that, and that was very much a my message to the team was I was sharing this with Charlie actually, was to pause, reflect, and refocus in readiness for the new year. And we did a celebrate success, learnings, every day is a school day, ultimate success formula, if we're not getting what we want to achieve. And that was a very big discussion. And I think if I'm doing a good job was at the end of that team meeting, I asked everybody to feedback something positive that they'd taken from that get together, and it was genuine feedback. So in terms of a grab it, I think I did a good job on that day.
And Sonia, do you need people to tell you when you're not doing a good job, or do you already know?
I think that this is something that I'm learning especially as part of being in this role, that I don't need permission, and I can actually tell myself if I'm doing a good job, or I should have an awareness of that as I grow into the role.
Okay, great. Now, what we're hearing, and this is a very sensible approach, is the value in feedback, and it's something that we've encouraged you to seek out on this particular program. Now, if you think about it, feedback is obviously the external perspective on how you're doing, whether you're doing a good job or not a very good job. That's the external perspective. But there is also the internal perspective as well. And particularly as a leader, it's very useful to develop the skill of evaluating your own performance and seeking out that feedback, which is that external perspective on how other people, it may be, you know, trustees, it may be your team, whoever you report into, your chair. Obviously there is absolute value in getting their perspective as well. It's important to remember, though, that there are those two perspectives, and this one, in terms of a pattern, is what we call internal or external. And a good question for this is the one that we've just asked you now. How do you know you've done a good job? Now, on the basis, again, that this is a spectrum, and some people are very much over this external side of things, and some people, in terms of their default pattern, are very much on the internal side of things. Now, what that looks like is that some people, if they think about whether they're doing a good job or not, they just know already. They have a very strong internal compass that lets them know whether they're doing a good job or not. Now, whether that corresponds with the outside world doesn't matter at this stage, but they are, their first port of call, if you like, is that they will get usually a feeling or a series of feelings that indicates to them whether they are doing a good job or not a very good job. Now, and at the extreme, some people who are internal referencers will only take the internal reference. They will only rely on their own sense to indicate whether the job is good or not. Now you can see that that's not a very sensible approach. It would always be useful to get that external perspective as well. On the other side, if somebody is at the extreme of external, it's almost like they have no sense themselves whether the quality of the work is good or not. And they have to get this external perspective. They have to ask somebody else, and that's where their benchmark is. It's not from within, it's purely external. And these are extremes that we're talking about here. And you know, you may already be doing both perfectly well.
And so what's interesting, if I'm someone who's got an incredibly strong internal driver and I'm managing or leading a team where individuals may be more external, I wonder what I might or might not do that would be useful for people. As an internal referencer, I don't need to be told I'm doing a good job. So I might default to not giving feedback to others who actually need and want to be told whether they're doing a good or a bad job. Because from my perspective, well, you know, they're getting on with it. They'll know whether they're doing a good job or not, because I'm stuck there. So you could get individuals who are waiting to be told almost, you know, that they're doing a good or bad job. So that's something to look out for if you're more on the internal reference. And on the and if you are that external reference, to start, and I think Sonia, you were talking about building this even stronger internal and in a new role, you know, it's finding what is that feeling that lets you know at this new place, in this new context, how do I measure it? And like Kevin said, it's often that it's somehow coming from within, and it tied in with one of your other responses there about it's your own personal alignment that you're checking in on, you know, in my integrity, do I feel like I'm doing a good job? And you want to encourage that as well.
So some ideas there, not just about managing your own performance, but about leading others. With all of these particular patterns and some of the other patterns that we've talked about throughout the program, the secret is to get to know the people who you are leading. Get to understand their values, get to understand one or two of their meta programs, and you will be better informed as a leader. Now, the final one that we're going to share with you today, we think is an incredibly important meta program, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one. And I'm sure when you've maybe attended a training program in the past, or you've worked with a coach or whatever, there are times when somebody shares an idea with you, and hopefully you've already had a few of those on this program, but there are times when somebody shares an idea and it really shakes up your map of the world. And when I came across this idea, this particular pattern many years ago, it really got me to see the world differently, if that's not putting too strong a point on it. So we're going to have a look at this particular pattern in the next 15 minutes or so. And what we want you, have we got time to do this, Ree?
It's challenging, I think, Kevin.
Yeah, okay. Here's what we'll do. Thinking back to your activity where you identified your values, what's important to you about your work, your career, what we want you to do is just bring to mind now one of those and just write it down. So you may have had something like, respect or commitment or trust or whatever it might be. Just bring that to mind, and if you've got something to write on in front of you, just write that one word down. Okay, now what we want you to do now, in a sentence, I'm going to ask you a question about the word that you've written down, and I want you to write down what's important to you about that. So if you've written the word trust, for example, now write down in a sentence what's important to you about trust. Everybody with that? Okay. Now, the next thing I would like you to do is whatever you've written down there, I want you to write down what's important to you about that. So you should have sentence A written down. So the next part is what's important to you about sentence A. Okay, and we haven't time today, but you could go on with that process. So you've now written sentence B. You could then ask the question, what's important to you about sentence B? And you've got sentence C, etc. But we'll leave it there for today. All right. Now we'll come back to what you've written down in a moment, and we're going to introduce this third and final pattern today. Incidentally, we're going to be putting up a module online about these patterns, and there'll be some more in there, and there'll also be some more information. So I'm going to share screen with you now. We're going to work through an example to just illustrate the power of this particular pattern. And remember, this is about motivation. So the example that we're going to work through, we're going to use money, which is something that we can all relate to personally and professionally. And We're going to take an example of person A, and it may be you. Person A is very clear on what they don't want in relation to money. So, for example, they may be very clear that if their income falls below a certain level, these will be the consequences. So organizationally, you may be focusing on this level under which you do not want to go because there are consequences for you as an organization. You might have to get rid of some services that you're providing, or you might have to let people go or whatever. Yeah. So what happens is, either individually or organizationally, if this person or organization starts to go towards that level, they become aware of it and they take action. Well, they feel motivated, first of all, and then they take action, maybe massive action. And let's say, for the purposes of argument, that their action is successful and they manage to get away from the thing that they don't want to have. Now, their motivation then drops because they're far enough away from this thing that they don't want. And sometimes what can happen is they find that they are going again close to this line below which they don't want to fall. Motivation kicks in, they take massive action, and then they get away from it. Now, what we've observed over time with this particular pattern is the line can be like this. And this is what we call an away from pattern. And in the away from pattern, the distinctive feature is that the person or organization is very clear on what they don't want. Hopefully everybody's clear on the idea there. Let's take person B now. Now, or person T, actually, we've called them here for a particular reason. Person T is very clear on what they want. And in our example, this is in terms of money. So it might be income, it might be money in the bank, or whatever it might be. So where they want, where they are compared to where they want to be, there is a gap at the moment. So they have motivation because they want to get to this higher level. They take action, and let's say, again, it's successful. Now, what's interesting is when they get to the point at which they wanted to get to, you might think that their motivation could now reduce and they might plateau, and that may be the case. But what we often find is that somebody who is running this particular pattern will then recalibrate. So they will say, okay, now I'm going to set myself a higher target. Because they're not there, they have motivation, they take action, and let's again, not always the case, but let's say that they get to this particular point. Now, over time then, what we see is this pattern, which is what we call a towards pattern. So the observation is very clear that the patterns are very different. And what we find with this particular pattern is that it can be very strong in individuals. And again, these patterns are running unconsciously. So people are not always aware that they are having a very clear image of the thing that they don't want. And the paradox, and this is the bit that really kind of shook me up when I heard it for the first time, is the paradox in this particular idea is that when people are very clear on what they don't want, they are being drawn towards it. And the reason for that is because it's like they're having a mental rehearsal for the thing that they don't want. So if they are spending time, consciously and unconsciously, more to the point, contemplating these consequences and the things that they don't want for themselves or their organization, it's like a mental rehearsal that they're being drawn towards it. So people who are running the away from pattern are often scratching their heads that, you know, why are they kind of bouncing up and down at these lower levels? Whereas people who are generally more towards in their thinking, they're always contemplating the things that they want in life, in their career. And again, that's a mental rehearsal. So they're being drawn towards the things that they want. And I, you know, I often say to groups, I'll give you a little task to do, and the task is, don't think of a pink elephant. Now, as soon as that's suggested, the first thing that we do, and this is to do with the way the brain works, the first thing that we do is we think of a pink elephant. Even though there is a don't in front of it, the brain cannot process a negative directly. So, you know, if I say to you, for example, you know, don't think about this glass of water. What the brain does instantly is it thinks about the glass of water. And that's what brings on the paradox that if we are unconsciously, and this was a kind of wake-up call for me and many others who we've shared this pattern with, that if you are thinking about the things that you don't want, the paradox is you may be being drawn towards them. Anything to add on that one, Rita, that I've...
Sonia's got a question which might
Yeah.
prompt us to add something.
I think that's fascinating. Can I just ask, is that related to the law of attraction? I've read a book called The Secret, which it does resonate in relation to what you've just talked about, Kevin. So just interested to get your views on that. Thank you.
There is some overlap, I think. There are some interesting ideas in The Secret. I wouldn't necessarily go along with them all personally, but I think, yeah, there is definitely something. There is a correlation between the things that I mentioned in there and this idea of towards and away from. Yeah.
And certainly that modeling of what you want. What I believe is in that modeling of what you want, thinking about what you do want, not what you don't want, what I do want, then I'm opening up my whole unconscious and conscious mind, my system 1 and my system 2, to be looking out for opportunities to make that happen. So I think it does tie in with some of The Secret, but I think there's a mind working there very powerfully to help that happen. I was going to add something about so what's really interesting, so how this plays out in many ways, and we've got lots and lots of examples, but for instance, when we're doing coaching or therapy work with someone comes to us, what do they come with? They come with a problem often. You say, what are you doing here? I don't want to be doing this anymore. I don't want to have sleepless nights. I don't want to be in this type of relationship. And that's how they present it. And often one of our first questions, obviously we listen, and then I say, well, when that's not here anymore, what do you want instead? And so often there isn't anything. They haven't contemplated that question. So they're constantly saying, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. Paradoxically, that's what they're getting, because it's on their mind all the time. It could be about dieting, not eating, not smoking, not drinking, but thinking about smoking, drinking and eating all the time that you don't want to be doing that isn't very helpful in the way our brain processes things. So the thing that it's a really, really powerful question when you're looking at your strategy, when you're looking at something that hasn't worked, when you're doing solutions to things that haven't worked in the past. What do we want to happen? What do we want instead? What do you want instead? Contemplating the instead of, which is the towards, can be an incredibly powerful take you forward. And I can see the nods there. So, and sometimes we just don't do that. We get stuck. And if we're not getting what we want, we seem to be more stuck in it. And to be helpful to lift our heads out of that. So, well, what do you want instead? Really powerful.
Any other questions? I just want to add one further thing on that, but any other questions on that or observations? Okay. Just reminding us that this is a pattern that's about motivation, and another metaphor that we often use for this pattern is carrot and stick, which again I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, what was interesting when we had our workshop last time and the fire alarm went off, and when it went off and we realized that actually we needed to do something about it because we thought it was just a drill, that's a really good indicator of running an away from pattern. And you know, a fire alarm, if we're not expecting one, is a trigger for an away from pattern. Now, what happens with an away from pattern is people respond very quickly. So when we talk about getting to know your staff, for example, if you have somebody whose default is this away from pattern, what will work for them is making them aware of the consequences. If you want them to improve their performance, let's say, what will work for them, and it may be kind of contra to all your instincts, but what will work for them is if you make them aware of the consequences of missing a deadline, for example. Yeah. Whereas somebody who is running a towards pattern, that's not going to work very well as a motivator. What will work for them is some kind of incentive, some kind of reward, you know, whatever that may be, that's appropriate within your organization, for example. And there is therefore the possibility that if you just use one approach, you're only potentially going to be that's only going to work with 50% of your team. So it's useful to have a mix of those approaches, and it's even more useful when you recognize which approach is going to work with one individual. Now, in the long term, what it's useful to do for yourself and maybe for your teams is to encourage this move towards strategy. So, you know, as Rita says there, that quite often when we're doing one-to-one work, which is sometimes it's more therapy based than what you might call coaching, we are presented with problems, and it's because this person has this default pattern, this filter, which is about identifying the things that they don't want. So one thing that we will do is to encourage them to develop this idea of identifying what they do want. So, you know, to nurture that in your team in the long term is a great thing to do, but in the short term, it's using that mix of approaches, that carrot and stick approach, so that you get the results that you're looking for.
So it's another one to bear in mind in your communications, in your briefings to mixed groups. What are the consequences if we don't do it, and what are the incentives and the benefits if we do it? So you're ensuring you're covering both bits. Okay, we are going up to time. We did say we'd put some more stuff up Kevin, which I think will explain more. And as always, Kevin and I are happy if you are in any place and you want to just ask us a question. Just didn't quite get that, but it sounded really powerful. I hope there was enough in what Kevin shared there to just bring home to you the importance of these different drivers in terms of motivation drivers. I certainly saw some acknowledgement in you thinking about it, and perhaps when you return and look at your statements, that's why we asked you to write the statement rather than just the word. When you look back on that, are there words that I don't want this? What does it do for me? It means that I'm more, it means that I'm no longer stressed, or it means the world isn't full of poverty anymore. They're away from messages. The towards ones are more the visionary statements of where do I want to be? I will enjoy my life more, as opposed to I'll be less stressed. So you can hear that people could say, it seems like the same sort of thing I'm saying there, and yet they're very different in what's going on internally in my mind and internally in your mind when you hear me say it. You're not focusing on being stressed. Once I say the word stressed, that's a sort of negative. You go there in your brain. How else can you comprehend what the word means without visualizing it and sensitizing it in some way? Whereas if I talk about an easy, joyful life, hopefully you have enough references to take you there to understand what easy and joyful are like. So I think that's the power behind it. Unless you're all able to stay with us for another while, I think we're going to have to draw the call. But is there anything, if you ask a question, if there's anything that will help you understand how this is going to make a difference to you as a leader individually, how it's going to make a difference to your organization and your strategic development? Or just say, oh, yes, Ruth, Beth.
Really, really quickly, loads of food for thought as ever. So thank you for that, to go away and rack my brain. But I've just been thinking about this really quickly in terms of our organisation. I think we are eternally trying. Your financial demonstration is a real life one, as far as I'm concerned. And I suspect it's the same for lots of particularly small charities. So for me, there's a really clear aim and target there to reframe what we're trying to not do into what we need to be trying to do. So thank you for that. Lots to think about.
Brilliant.
And reframing is a great word, actually. That's exactly what we'd encourage you to do. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think at this point then I'm going to invite everyone to just open up their mics. I'm going to invite us all to say goodbye to each other at some point. Before that, let me just remind you, we will be putting up a consolidation module for you to complete, remembering that in terms of completion of the programme, it's the whole programme online, the Zoom and the workshops attendance and engagement with, and you won't get your ILM professional upgrade until that's all completed and signed off.
And for those of you who are running a towards pattern, when you have finished all of your modules, you will get the upgrade to professional member.
Very good. Very good. You will. I was being very school mum, which is an interesting perspective.
The modules will
stay up. We're just sharing the brain at this point. We only have one brain between the two of us, so the modules stay up. They'll be up for at least 6 months after this, so they are available. So you do get additional benefits from being the professional membership if you complete them as soon as. It's useful for us, and we will encourage you and send you a note to finish them at the same time, because obviously our time that we can invest further on, we'll be starting other programs with other participants. So for us to be able to mark yours in a timely manner, it's useful to consider doing it within the next, in the first week of the new year would be a really good time for you probably to review what you've learned and establish your ongoing development as a result of what this journey you've started. And it's been absolutely delightful working with you all. I think we really have bonded as a learning cohort. We had another question we were going to ask you, but I'm just going to ask you it to float in your minds, just to consider what you've most valued as being part of this whole conduit, this particular learning cohort. What is it that you've valued most? just allow yourself to wonder about that. As we say, thank you very much. And it's been a delight. We have another call in 3 months' time to see just how brilliantly you've done it. We will also invite some questions of reflection and planning in the online. Anything else, Kevin?
Just to say that we have the next program is starting in the end of March. So if you know of anybody who would benefit from this program, point them in the direction. I think we already have half the places taken up, and it's only just started the advertising on that one, so it will fill up. So yeah, pass the word on.
Okay, and of course it's season's greetings as well. The best of whatever season's greetings, warmth and crispness and everything else that it might bring. Do keep in touch with us via the online and any other mechanism you would like. And over to each and every one of us to say cheerio and thank you very much. Cheerio and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye. Have a good one.
Bye. Oh, we didn't get to speak to Chrissy, did we? She's on mute. Oh, have a good Christmas. Bye.